yourselves and tell the audience where you're from.
So my name is Rafael Nunez. I'm with GLG Industries, and we are very engaged in complying with these standards, and we've been doing a lot of work in innovation to comply and have it be seamless for you as end users.
Good morning. My name is Malcom. I'm Vice President of Marketing for Skyjack. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from these parts, so I was born and bred in Europe. It came over here about 10 years ago. So Skyjack, as Rafael said, are doing similar things with regard to the standards and modifying equipment, and hopefully we can help answer some of your questions later on.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, gentlemen. I'll run through a few prepared questions, like I said, then we'll get to yours. So the standard, as Tresa mentioned, the standard was pushed out from December to March 1st. Are the standards and manuals of responsibilities currently available for purchase going to be updated?
They are available at the present moment directly from the standards bodies. In addition to that, we have material from each manufacturers have looked at material that we can develop and is freely available on our websites. From the point of view of the updates, I think Tresa might be able to help on that, on the actual updates, that they may be updated as a result of some of these appeals. I'm not quite sure that would be the case.
So where you can purchase the standards and the manual responsibilities is the Scaffold, you'll probably hear me say it a few times, Scaffold Access and Industry Association, so SAIAonline.org is where you can purchase the standards and the manual responsibilities. On there, they have a notice that these standards and manual responsibilities are going to be updated. So I would, take a look at that website in terms of if you are going to be purchasing, there is going to be a change.
Okay. Does the NCAA 92 design standards apply to all MUPs, existing and new?
So I can take that. It only applies to machines manufactured after the effective date. So that date was originally December 10th of 2019, and I think as we've mentioned a couple of times, it's been moved out to March 1st of 2020. So any machine built after March 1st of 2020 will have to comply with the new standards that Tresa described.
If I could maybe add something to that, I think it's important that when we look at the suite of standards that we're talking about here, and it is a suite of standards, so you've got some standards that are targeted at the design of the equipment, and as Rafael rightly says, the new and remanufactured equipment will need to be compliant with the new standards. So your existing fleets prior to that date will have, for want of a better word, grandfather rights in terms of the design. When it comes to the element that Tresa also touched upon, which is the safe use and the training and the likes of, as soon as the standard comes into effect, that training element would be effective across all types of equipment.
Fantastic. In your opinion, Malcom or Rafael, have any of the new requirements in the standards driven innovation? We're here at a Total Control and Innovation Conference. That's the whole theme of why we're here. Do you feel like some of the new standards have actually driven innovation?
I think the answer is a little bit of yes and no. So if you look at one of the main impacts of the standard, I think, which is the load sensing side of things. Load sensing has been on machines in Europe for 10, 15 years now. So whilst that is nothing particularly new in terms of design and innovation, it's probably new to the market in North America. And I would suggest that maybe one of the cold comforts that you might be able to take from the standard is that the load sensing has been proven in Europe over that period of time and is very stable technology. But other elements of the design standard in terms of stability testing, certainly in Skyjack's case, has made us look to developing more robust scissor stack design. If we look at, again, returning to load sensing and specifically on booms, we see current practice whereby machines may have been overloaded in the marketplace in use recently. The new standards mean if that practice still continues, the machine will stop to work, will stop. point of view, the innovations that we've taken on to look to use the technologies to increase the capacities of those machines somewhat, to account for the fact that people are being putting maybe a little bit more weight into the machines than strictly speaking, has been the case by the label on the machine. So we've tried to develop it so that the machines have tried to catch up a little bit with the actual practice and utility in the marketplace. And I think similarly for scissors, on the scissor stack design, those sort of things have demanded the employment of some innovation.
Great, thank you. So Teresa mentioned a new indoor use only view coming up in 2020 as well. Are you folks making those currently, or do you plan to make them? And tell us a little bit more about the requirements for indoor use.
Yes, so some categories you'll see that we will designate machines indoor only. Every single machine will have to be labeled with what the wind requirements or the wind that it can withstand. But you will see certain machines that will only be allowed to be used indoors. So what that's going to do for you as a user is that you potentially are using certain machines indoor or outdoor right now. Once this standard comes into effect, you may have to select a different machine if you want to be working outdoors, particularly at a certain height. This will be clearly labeled on the machines. In certain instances, we're changing model nomenclature to accommodate that, so it's easy to identify. But certainly on the serial number plate, we will be designating whether it's an indoor-only or indoor-outdoor machine.
So you'll actually have an indoor-outdoor machine where you can flip a switch. I'm assuming it's going to restrict your height limitation?
Correct. So we have looked at the jobs that people are performing with scissor lifts, boom lifts, and have made a combination of changes in outdoor height, outdoor capacity, number of operators. So we've tried to kind of dial those, make changes to those different capacities to be able to give outdoor capabilities. So yeah, you can flip a switch and you can change the parameters of the machine.
Teresa, what's involved in supervisor training and how will that benefit users, safe use, etc.? What qualities will qualify someone to be a supervisor, and does a supervisor always have to be present on site?
Okay, I'll try to capture all that. I explained to you earlier about the supervisor training. So it's, when we give supervisors a greater ability, well, one, it's recognizing them as supervisors and that they need, some training and some understanding. But the whole bit around the selection of the proper mute for the application, as well as that hazard identification piece and how to mitigate those hazards. Also understanding, again, the roles and responsibilities that they have within regulations and standards. When you think about this, if you have someone that's your frontline supervisor, right? In so many cases, when there's incidents or injuries, they play a part. Like they could have helped in the prevention of that. And having better educated supervisors hopefully is going to reduce some of the incident rates that we're seeing with the units. In terms of does the supervisor have to be present at all times, the standard does not indicate that that's a requirement, that you have to have a supervisor present at all times.
Tell us a little more about familiarization training and how an operator can become familiarized with safe use of equipment.
I think the first thing that we need to say here is that the familiarization takes place against the background of training in the use of aerial work platforms in general. So the familiarization is very much targeted towards the specific machine concerned. And I think at the first level, the operator has the ability to read through and understand the manual that should always be with the machine. If there's not a manual with the machine, that person needs to get a hold of a manual for the machine. Equally, I think there is the ability, if there is a trained and a competent person in the form of a supervisor, and they have the ability to talk through and conduct a familiarization, for want of a better description, walk around or something like that on the machine, that is another option. And I think Teresa mentioned earlier on, there's also the requirement that people are given the time to understand after the manual, they have the time to digest and see that they are familiar with the operation of the machine. From a manufacturer point of view, and certainly knowing this was going to be really up front in people's minds, and I'm sure Rafael will confirm, we are producing materials outside of the manual, white papers and the likes of, that will talk about the responsibilities under the standard. And more we're looking at the way that we can provide video and a more interactive type familiarization techniques. And I think from the Skyjack point of view, you're going to see more of that, particularly as the industry gets more digitized and more mobile. So you have the ability for those sort of training materials to be available, on your cell phone and the likes like that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I will add is that, in the operator's manual, that's the place where somebody can get familiar with that specific machine. So that's the right step for anybody operating a new type of equipment. And I think, as Malcom confirmed, we are working on videos that will help operators quickly learn about the machine and self-familiarize with the equipment they're operating. So we think, videos is going to be a lot more helpful for people to view a quick video rather than read the whole operator's manual. So that's what we're working towards.
Great, thank you. So I know anytime we have a discussion about ANSI standards aren't actually required regulations or law, but compliance is critical. So Tresa, tell us a little bit about the difference between ANSI standards and OSHA law and why these ANSI standards are so important to be compliant with.
Sure. ANSI standards are voluntary, right? So OSHA rules, regulations are not. So there's your main difference. With the ANSI standards, though, you've got experts coming into a room and working towards something that is, best practice that's generated to try to improve the work and the use of the MUs. So when you think about that, and it kind of goes back to the very beginning of the presentation when I talked about looking at this from the perspective of you're going to have safer use of equipment, you're going to have fewer injuries, less property damage, and look at that as to one of your main reasons for doing the ANSI standards. I will say OSHA does have the ability through the general duty clause to reference back to the ANSI standards for those details, right? Because OSHA basically is giving the minimum requirements for, working safely, and they've looked to other sources for details.
So what solutions will United Rentals offer to aid customers in achieving compliance with, especially with supervisor and operator training?
United Academy is offering a Use for Managers course. It's an e-learning version that we'd love for you to visit and take a look at. And then we are looking at for kind of bringing that update. I talked about there's some changes that we need to ensure that operators are aware of and getting their training compliant with the new standards. And we're looking into probably December for an offering around that.
Fantastic. So last question, and we'll open it up to the audience. You mentioned where users can go to get more familiar with the A92 standards. Where else would you recommend for sources of reference on more details?
Right, so United Academy also has a one sheet available, similar in that we provide some of those highlights and also some information around the Need for Managers course. But I have mentioned to you the Scaffold and Access Industry Association as well. That's the secretariat for the A92 standards. So that is where you can access the standards and the manual responsibilities. But again, you've heard we've got United Rentals and our manufacturers that also are working towards providing additional information and keeping you up to date.
Anything to add, Dylan?
Yeah, I certainly from a Skyjack point of view, if you were to look at our website, and there's a particular page or section dedicated to the ANSI standards. It's got a number of what we call white papers that talk about the background of the standard, much like the talk today. We've also specifically produced a document that goes through the individual changes that would take place and what they mean from the equipment point of view. So you can take a view from an existing piece of equipment and see the sort of changes that would be made. As the standards are coming into, as the standards were coming into place in December, we've got this extension. We're just in the process of our machines physically changing over. So you'll start to see on the website there the new data sheets and new specifications that are available, and that'll give you an idea on some of the changes that are taking place, so you can see what a future machine will look like.
And what I'll add is that we've got, similar to what Malcolm mentioned, we've got a page on JLG.com. You can go there and we describe, what is the standard and what are we doing to meet and comply with the standard. We've got videos that we've developed that talk about the standards, and we are continuing to develop additional content to make sure that everybody in the industry is aware of the standards and knows what's coming.
Great, thank you. So, questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
All right, I have two. The first one's probably pretty simple, but with the change of ownership, if we buy a piece of equipment from United Rentals, right now the process is it's just invoice, but there's no real paper trail back to the OEM. Can that be adjusted within United for a sales transaction so that we get those bulletins and things like that? Secondly, with the new limitations, capacity limitations and everything, I remember back, and I think all of us here can kind of remember when the regen engines came on, we'd get calls from operators that turned into a service call for you, when really all they'd have to do is sit and wait and let it regen. Currently on AWP's moves, we have a series of audible alarms or maybe some red bars or a code. Our typical operators we're training call a technician whenever something like that happens, which results in downtime. Is there a way for the manufacturers to give more of a clear explanation of what the alarm is to save that service call and to get the uptime back?
That was like 7 questions. So why don't we start with the registration with the manufacturer? You referenced that this morning, that I guess it's incumbent on the buyer and purchaser to get it registered with the manufacturer, is that
Yes,
correct?
it would be on the new owner of that equipment to register with the manufacturer.
Okay. And guys, regarding the second part of the question around the alarms and the codes?
Yeah, I think we sort of bring ourselves back to the subject of familiarisation and the likes of, and the changes and the differences in alarms, etc., or detailed in Skyjack's instance within the manual, but also within the videos and the likes of that we have.
Yeah, I think, we are working on, control boxes that provide additional information so that potentially an operator can see they've got half the capacity or 3/4 of the capacity, so it would give them a visual instead of just an alarm. So select models are going to have that, and we look to incorporate that so that the operator knows it's not just a red alarm or a yellow alarm or what's going on, but that it's the weight that is causing the machine to not operate as they like it.
I think you're spot on though with anytime something new is introduced, like the regen and the depth fluid, anytime something new is introduced, it causes confusion. And I think you articulated it really well. Downtime for you and probably a wasted service call for us. So we're gonna have to spend a lot of time together making sure that your folks are familiar, your operators and supervisors are familiar with the new codes, what those alarms and sensors do and how they function, and make sure that everybody's understanding of what it all means. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think the gentleman in the front row there had a call or a question.
Jeff.
Hi there. I was wondering if United Rentals or the manufacturers have put any thought into how this is going to affect your Canadian clients. Are there any changes here that is going to be affected through the CSA code on ANSI?
Effectively, in practical terms, the designs of the machine are both standards. The design requirements of both standards are equal. So from the point of view of the actual machine itself, I don't see too much difference at all. The CSA standard is physically actually in place ahead of the ANSI standards. It's a good question, and it's one that I hadn't really thought of, the degree to which, for example, some of the appeals that are going on may make a difference, and can't answer you, so I'll go and try to get an answer after which if you
I can speak to it a little bit. When in developing both the standards, we were really trying timeline-wise to have them, in essence, come out at the same time, right? And so they mirror each other pretty closely. There's not a lot of difference. An example might be with supervisors. They don't necessarily require training for supervisors in the CSA, but by the time you get that person qualified to be one, you're in essence basically doing the same thing, right? So they're pretty closely aligned.
Yeah, we don't allow modules.
Is that another one that's not in the CSA?
Yeah, you
Okay.
need training to be able to,
Okay.
period.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that one,
But
but.
the annual inspections, we've been doing that for decades.
Mhm.
Question back here?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that the operator is trained and certified. So my question would be in regards to brokers or third party. Whose responsibility would it be to make sure that there's compliance and certification in regards to those operators?
So are you saying if there was a job site and there's contractors on that job site, whose responsibility it is for those contractors' employees to be trained? Is that
Correct.
Okay.
So if you're a broker or if you're someone who sets up just the equipment for that job site and you're managing it for them, but you're not actually utilizing it yourself. You have a GC who's working there, or the store is using it.
Okay,
So
I
is
think
it the broker's responsibility or the third party's responsibility to make sure that those people on site are certified and compliant?
So it's the user, which is typically the employer's responsibility, to have their employees trained, right, to have their operator training. So that's like the clear message around that, and who's first and foremost responsible for it. Yeah.
You noted that the repair and maintenance on the machines must be done by a qualified person or a tech, not a certified. I was just wondering what the requirements are for the qualification, or who qualifies that tech?
So actually, the reference I made was that they have to be trained by a qualified person, and there's a definition in the standards as to what qualified person is in terms of, whether it's education, experience, knowledge, those sorts of things. So that was really the reference. The standard, I don't believe, speaks to specifically what those requirements are, so I have to defer if the manufacturers might have any comments, I don't know.
Okay, and the annual certification on the machine, who does that? That has to be done by a qualified tech?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, question over here?
Yeah, so we talk about new sensors and all that good stuff. My question is, with telematics and all that, are you guys thinking about maybe putting that together where we can get real-time alerts if we're out of the envelope, sensor's gone bad, defeated a safety device, any of those that could, to the equipment manager, say, hey, somebody's messing with the machine, or it needs attention, or is being operated in the wrong manner?
From a Skyjack point of view, yes, we're not quite there yet, but certainly one of the changes that we've made in our machines that in reality goes a little bit beyond the standard was to really accommodate the telematics suite that we offer, a product called Elevate, to offer that sort of technology. So we've changed the controller in the machine that enables that sort of flexibility to add those sort of sensor data inputs and outputs into and do this. So that we're in the process of going through that and using various techniques to understand and try to produce, if you like, real-time reports that you'll be able to get through your mobile device, for example.
Anything with GLG?
Yeah, so our machines are getting smarter. We are adding additional sensors with load sensing. It's a good opportunity for us to be able to know how much weight is on the platform. We can maybe add additional attachments or accessories that are now going to be able to be used on machines that maybe in the past we wouldn't have allowed. And to your question specifically around telematics, yes, we are working towards the ability to tell you from a remote location. The reason the machine is not working properly is because it's overloaded. So it saves you a trip, and it makes you more productive, saves money. So that's definitely the way we're headed.
You got 3 months left.
Get to work then. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. Just simple in the manuals, is there any way, like, since manuals change constantly and manuals disappear out of equipment, is there any idea of like, you know, like a QR code scanner for manuals so they can always have the most updated information or anything like that?
From a Skyjack point of view, I could answer that question, but then I'd have to kill you.
Yeah, I mean, the manuals are available on our website, so maybe not a QR code, but they are available on our website, which you can access using your mobile device. I think there's a reference to a manual being on a machine though, and I don't know how that, if a QR code would I don't know if Teresa can weigh in on that.
There's conversations around it, but no determination.
Great idea though, just think about that, right? If the manual's missing, you can scan your code and get an immediate pull up on your phone, so.
Updated.
It's a
Shameless plug, come to me out in.
great. We got time for one more question. Anybody else have anything?
Operator certification training that we have today, is it gonna change?
So for operator training?
Yes.
Right, so as I mentioned, because we've got some new roles, we have the requirement on the annual inspection, that there is some form of an update that's needed to bring your operators into compliance. And that's really, you know how your employees were trained, right? The content, the quality, and you'll have to determine, okay, well, what is different that wasn't supplied in the training that they've had to bring them into compliance.
All right, we have one more question over here.
Teresa, this is directed towards you. Best practices manuals, as we have in the past, a series of them. Once these are all finalized, will there be a new series of best practices manuals that address these changes?
John, that's an interesting question. I haven't had conversations about that yet, but yeah, those were around the 2006 standards, so always a possibility. That was brought together by the associations and some team members around that, so maybe more to come.
Great. We have a question in the back here. Do you have a question?
Yeah, with new standards and Nancy coming around, it says evidence of annual inspection. So that just means a stamp on the piece of equipment that suffice for, let's say the owners. Because as we get, more technology on the job site, the owners want to cover all bases and make sure they have evidence of everything that can be certified, annual inspections and stuff like that. Is there a paper copy that comes with that every time as a subcontractor orders up equipment from United Rentals? Will you guys submit like a digital form of annual inspection for that particular piece of equipment?
So generally speaking, it takes the form of a decal on the unit, and it says, the date, and then, by the way, it says annual. You have 13 months is the interval to complete the annual inspection. And so it will then say, this is the date of the annual inspection, and this is the interval at which those
Okay, so go back to the annual inspection, according to the standard, does the standard describe what that annual inspection requirements are?
It's generally speaking, it gives different parts to it. It doesn't give you the list.
Okay.
Right?
Great. Well, thank you everybody for your time and attention. We're going to wrap this portion of the workshop up. We look forward to working with you and helping you and your teams to come into compliance with all these sweeping changes coming in March of next year. Enjoy the rest of the conference.